So tell me a little bit about when it happened and what kind of experiences you had.
Well, I don't know when it started in Hopkins per se. I heard that supposedly way back in the 60s everybody used to cruise Lake Street, and they decided to drive all the way down Lake Street until it ended, which was at Shady Oak Road in Hopkins. And the main street there used to be called Excelsior Boulevard when we cruised. And that's how I heard it started, is they just went out there from the Lake Street. That would have been way before my time. I first heard about it in 1978. I just graduated from high school, and a newspaper article, Star Trib, showed pictures and talked about cruising and stuff. And it took me a couple of months to find my way out there, because being new and just getting my first car, didn't know my way around the city too well. And when we got out there, finally did find it, we couldn't believe how bright the lights were in downtown Hopkins. They had the street lights way up here, and they had mall lights along here, which allowed for to see cars really well, see into the cars. And unlike other cruising places where you had 2 lanes, I mean, there were 3 main reasons to cruise. 1 was to show off your car. 2 was to find a drag race. So a lot of guys spent a lot of time and money building up a fast car, and it was kind of an ego thing to show it off if they could find a good drag race against somebody else who had built up their car. And the 3rd reason, of course, was to pick up members of the opposite sex. For me, it was picking up the girls, and there were plenty of girls who wanted to meet more guys. So you had those 3 main reasons. And Hopkins, because it was, at the time I got down there, they had made it kind of a mall, more of a walk mall, a shopping mall, so you didn't have the drag racing element. All you could do is show off your car because it was so lit up, and of course meet members of the opposite sex.
How many people? How did the street look?
You mean as far as cars or people walking?
Cars and people walking.
Both. All right. Well, it started out, it wasn't too bad, but as popularity grew, there were several other cruising areas around the Twin Cities that were being shut down. In the late 70s, we had our first energy crisis, and that prompted local police departments and cities to try and discourage cruising. The last main one I remember was downtown St. Paul, called the Loop, and they built the Town Square Shopping Center right over the middle of the Loop. So Hopkins was it. It was the last place to go, and it started to get really, really crowded. By 1979, I would say that was probably the beginning of the peak years of cruising Hopkins. And you'd get, on Friday and Saturday nights, you'd get up to 1,000 cars on this 1.5 mile stretch, which went from Burger King at one end down to the 7-Eleven at the other end. 7-Eleven was on the corner of 17th and Excelsior, and Burger King was half a block west of 5th and Excelsior. And there was the Hopkins 1-2-3 movie theater right on the corner of 5th and Excelsior, which was a historic landmark they wanted to save, but it ended up getting torn down anyway. We'd turn around in the Burger King parking lot, and we'd head back down to the 7-Eleven. Sometimes you'd go further. I mean, before 7-Eleven, we used to turn left on 17th if you're going west, down to Central Park, turn around in the park, but they put an end to that by barricading the park, so then it was in 7-Eleven parking lot or around the block of 7-Eleven. If we wanted to do the long cruise, we'd go all the way down to Shady Oak Road, turn around in Schwinn parking lot down there. Schwinn is long since burned down, but there used to be a big Schwinn bicycle shop at the end there. Or you could go all the way down to where Highway County 3, I don't know if it's still called County 3 now, and there was a Western gas station down there, and that was actually Minnetonka. That was the border of Hopkins and Minnetonka. We'd turn around there and come back up. So.
Were there many problems with police, or what happened with the cars? Any issues with the drug abuse or picking up girls or traffic accidents?
Well, there was one particular traffic accident happened several years into the cruising scene where some drunk kids were racing down Fifth Avenue, lost control of their car and hit the power pole, and they had the main power line coming straight down from the transformer down underground. I assume it was to go to underground feeds or whatever. Well, when their car impacted the pole, it severed the power pole, and it shut the entire, there was no power to the whole city. And I happened to be turning around on a side street when the kids hit it, and all you saw was headlights. That was the only lights left in town, was these headlights. But as far as the cops go, at first, most of them didn't seem to care that we cruised. I mean, in 1979, they even let us cruise. They set all the stoplights on all the corners to four-way flash, so it was like four-way stop signs, and they just let us have at it. It was mostly, because it was mostly rich kids. I mean, there were no street gangs in the Twin Cities at that time. And, I mean, there was recreational drug use, but the big thing was alcohol. I mean, the legal drinking age then was 19. So there were plenty of people drinking, a lot of cruisers going to the bar. DWIs weren't a serious offense back then, so they'd go to the bar, have several beers, get back in the car, and start cruising up and down or bar hopping along the mall. And one of the things we liked, got a kick out of was one of the things the cops would do is they'd climb up on the roof of the buildings along Main Street with binoculars, and they'd look down into the cars to see which kids were drinking. And then they'd radio, you know, pull this car over, pull that car over. So a buddy of mine had an ingenious counter to that the cops were doing. He took a 5-gallon keg, hooked it up in the trunk of his car, ran surgical tubing under the carpet of his car up to the front, and he could drink and drive, and the cops couldn't see from the roof that he was drinking.
What was the role of the Citizens Band radio?
Oh, well, the mid-'70s began the CB craze, Citizen Band Radio. Everybody had to have a CB. And, you know, there were no cell phones back then. There was no internet. So if in your car, if you wanted to communicate with other people other than yelling out the window, you had to have a CB radio. And everybody was getting them. And Hopkins was the rich kids. So at least a third of the cruisers had CBs. And most of the CB handles were kind of sexually suggestive because they were trying to attract members of the opposite sex. If your nice car didn't do it, maybe your CB handle would do it. And the CB really, I think, it added to the cruising and it extended the cruising, because when the cops started to crack down and to get rid of the cruisers, and the reason they wanted to get rid of cruising was because the environmentalists came in, and they said that you had these 1,000 cars on Friday and Saturday nights. They're crammed into this 1.5 mile stretch. It's one lane each way, and cars, of course, weren't as clean burning. Fuel still had lead in it. You know, we didn't have this clean fuel or anything like that, and you could smell exhaust. I mean, if you walked the street, it was a strong smell of exhaust. The environmentalists came in. They said the pollution levels were so high down there on Main Street, and people lived above these shops, and they were, you know, getting carbon monoxide through their windows in the summertime because there's so many cars. So they tried to get rid of us first by putting up roadblocks. Well, that dispersed us out onto the side streets, and of course we had the CBs. So normally that might have killed it. But because we had the CBs, we were still able to keep in contact. We'd pull over in parking lots and hang out in the parking lots and everything. And, of course, there was some of that even before, right along the Main Street. But now we were going into parking lots in residential neighborhoods or just about anywhere, closed businesses. And that really frustrated, you know, the effort to get rid of us. And, of course, the cops also monitored CB. So pretty soon they caught on, you know, which lots we were going to. So we coded the parking lots. We had lot 1, lot 2, lot 3, and we'd gather in one parking lot, and then we would, you know, as a group decide on the codes for all these other lots. And what they did then was they put up no trespassing signs and no loitering signs. So if a business was closed, you weren't allowed to turn around in the parking lot because that was considered trespassing. If the business, if you were just parked in the parking lot, even if it was open, then you were loitering. And but they had to give you a warning. So we'd all meet in the parking lot. One of the favorites was Tate's Super Value, which was half a block north of Main Street between 8th and 9th. I don't know if that's still there anymore, is it?
That's called Driscoll's. They have a deli. I go there once in a while.
One night, this is a little side thing, but one night the A burnt out in the neon sign of Tate's. And needless to say, that presented some interesting conversations over the CB radio.
Real interesting.
But anyway, so the cops we'd all be, hanging out in the parking lot. The cops would come in. They'd say we'd have to leave, so we'd all get in our cars and we'd leave. They'd tell us, if we catch you here again, you're going to get a loitering ticket. So then we just moved to the next parking lot. And we've discovered that they had to warn us for each parking lot. They couldn't just arrest us for loitering unless it was the same parking lot twice. So, we'd have 8 or 9 parking lots in the whole city of Hopkins that we would, by the end of the night, we'd have visited them all. And after a while, the cops got lazy. They wouldn't even come in. They'd just drive by. They'd flash their spotlight on the side of the car on us. We'd all get in our cars and we'd head to the next lot or whatever lot we decided to on the CB. So the CB radio really prolonged the cruising in Hopkins, and of course it made it a lot easier to meet other people in the cars.
So what made you decide to stop cruising?
By the time the cruising, they finally killed it in about 1988, and I had quit cruising in 86 because whenever I had a girlfriend, I rarely cruised unless she was gone or whatever, because generally you go down there to pick up a girl or to meet a girl, but you didn't want to lose your girlfriend when you got down there. So it was something to do once in a while, but most of the time I was out doing something with her. So I don't know what the final thing that they did to get rid of everybody, but I know they had to make some law changes because there was a constitutional right to be able to drive on a public street. And at first, some parents fought that. They said, hey, you're giving my kid a ticket for this, that, and the other thing, and this is a public street. You can't do this. And so it took them a long time, but I assume it was a combination of heavily targeting the cruisers and roadblocks and everything else that finally killed it in Hopkins. Then we all went to Anoka.
Hey.
That was the last cruising strip for the Twin Cities. Anoka was finally shut down in 1989 when they made laws nationwide outlawing cruising. I mean, cruising was a crime you could get a ticket for. You went to court for it because they were finally able to change those laws.
How do you think you'd like Hopkins now for you and say your kids in the future? They have a Hopkins Center for the Arts with his arts museum and a live theater stage. The Depot Coffee House has rock music on the weekends and folk singing on Tuesday nights for the open mic program, and a lot of teenagers go to that. And they also have now the Main Street School for the Performing Arts, which is kind of across the street from the Hopkins Center for the Arts, and they have quite a few restaurants and coffee shops and another movie theater that's right on the main street of Hopkins. How does that sound or compare to what was happening when you were cruising? Would you enjoy the community the way it is now?
I suppose, you always like rock concerts when you're a kid. So that part sounds pretty good. And as far as coffee shops, well, we had donut shops. On the corner of 8th and Main was Mr. Donut, and that was the hangout of the Sober Rollers motorcycle gang. And they were called the Sober Rollers because they didn't drink. They just hung out at the donut shop, and of course, those that were fans of motorcycles and Harleys and all that, they went there too. So that probably hasn't changed, but the rest of this stuff sounds pretty organized. I mean, in my day, kids were pretty much let alone to, learn on their own. They could, make mistakes, and get in trouble, whatever, as long as it wasn't too serious, and they were pretty much left to learn on their own. So I don't know. What can kids do now? They're on chat rooms on the computer. They text message. They got cell phones. There isn't the group interaction that there was in our day. It's more, well, the way I look at it, it's more like a fantasy. I mean, if you're text messaging with somebody, you make up in your mind their intent and how they mean it and what they're really saying. Whereas in my day it was always face to face, or at least telephone, not cell phone, but telephone or CB radio. And a CB was not private, and anybody with a CB could tune in and listen to everybody else, which actually made it more fun. So I don't know what kids can really do anymore that isn't illegal.
Sure. I think you've answered almost a lot of the questions I had, and some of the things you said will be real interesting about the police activities and how the role of the CB radio. I think those are some good quotes that I can use in my video. If we want to look at the video that you have, we could do that.
Well, I actually have two.
Oh,
One, I went down with an old 8mm. Before we had video cameras, there was 8mm and Super 8 film. And any Joe Blow. My mom got our 8mm camera with a bank deposit for free, and it was just a small little movie camera. I went down there one night and I filmed. There's no sound, but later on, I transferred it, or had it transferred to videotape, and then I dubbed my own soundtrack. So there's that.
Great.
It's pretty dark, you can't see it. And the other one is where Twin Cities Today, which was a local, variety TV show on Channel 5, where they would, go around the Twin Cities and show various things like restaurants and parks and whatever. And one day they discovered cruising and decided to do a thing on cruising. The only comment I got to make on that is the cops they had down there that night, the Twin Cities Today was there, were we had never seen those cops before. The cops that we dealt with normally and knew them on a first name basis, there wasn't a single one of them to be found. So we figured what the cops were saying was kind of staged.
Sure. Well, I will